This is BMI Inspires, episode number 20, the webinar where we share stories of inspiring companies and how they create new value through business model innovation. Stories about existing large companies that need to make a shift, and stories about game changers who initiated the shift themselves. My name is Joyce Langelaar, marketing lead at Business Models Inc. and your host for today. I'm here with my colleagues Patrick van der Pijl and Roland Wijnen. Today marks a very special day because we gave birth to our new baby, the Business Model Shifts book. In this BMI Inspires, we'll share a bit more about the why of this book and how this all came together. We will also share our point of view on how you can clearly see and commit to making your own shift. A shift that puts you on a growth trajectory, creates new long-term value for your customers, and generates future revenues. Should you have any questions, please put them in the chat. My colleagues, Kira and Anna-Mart, will be happy to answer them, or we will do at the end of this session. First, a bit more about Business Models Inc., or BMI for Friends. We help companies to collectively address the simple question, where is value next? We do that through visioning and strategy design, business model innovation, acceleration of new concepts or ideas, and even by launching completely new ventures. We operate for global Fortune 500 companies and work close together with their CEOs and innovation teams. All right, now it's time to introduce you to our first speaker of today, Wijnen, strategy designer at BMI. Working for more than 8 years at BMI. Have you ever experienced such a turbulent year before?
No, not really. It's a quite drastic change that we see right now, because on the one hand, we hear stories about companies that see their business models go up in smoke. And on the other hand, we hear stories about companies that see an increasing demand for their products and services. And this is all driven by a drastic change in people, and so also customer behavior. For example, we've never worked so much from home, and the problem we used to have with traffic jams and pollution, they are instantly solved right now. Of course, it's unfortunate that there is no demand for some products and services anymore. But on the other hand, we are still people, and people never sit still. We'll look for other products and services and experience to satisfy our needs.
I see. And what does this pandemic mean for business models and how companies add?
Well, what you see in times of crisis, and we obviously saw this before, but never at this scale, is that in times of crisis, you really come to see what people really value. Their health, job security, connection, being connected to family, friends, and colleagues in different ways. And of course, convenience. That's quite important for people as well in these times. So this actually leads to a lot of business model innovation, and at BMI we like to be at the crossroads of this, of all of this innovation. So it's interesting to see how much acceleration we see. So, for example, in the city here in the Netherlands, in Hoorn, they were discussing building and creating an online warehouse for the retailers in the inner city for many years now. And at the beginning of this pandemic, within weeks, it became real and it was live. What you also see with the big retailers like Amazon and IKEA and Coolblue, they see a massive demand for how they actually deliver value to their customers, because many people go to their websites to conveniently shop online.
Yeah, and as I understand correctly, it even led to adding a chapter about COVID-19 last minute to the book to make it hyper relevant.
Yeah, that's right. So that was a request from the publisher, and that's how we indeed add even more value at this time. Yeah.
Yeah, great to hear. Our other guest today is Patrick van der Pijl, CEO of BMI. Patrick, Business Model Shift is not your first book, right?
No, we started in 2010 with the book called Business Model Generation. And that's where, together with Alex Osterwalder and Yves Penier, we introduced this notion of the business model canvas, which was a mind-blowing introduction so many years ago and actually still a major bestseller globally. We have been selling actually almost 5 million copies. So the good thing is that we wanted to create again something about more business models, and in that same way. The bad thing is you can never ever compete with the book called Business Model Generation, because that one was a very, very big hit, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I heard a rumor about Richard asking for a book about the absolute best business model. Why isn't that an idea that came true?
Yeah, so let me take you back to January 2019. I was working with Roland in New York for one of our clients, helping them to shift to shareholders perspective and shareholder shift, what we call it right now. And when we had a drink with Richard said like, hey guys, I would really love a book that includes all the best business models in the world. He said, that's my dream. And then I said, Richard, I don't believe there is such thing, because a business model that's successful today can be obsolete tomorrow, right? Yeah. We also felt that business models actually follow a pattern, same as a living organism. So it starts with a birth, it starts to grow or not, and then in the end it will die or will remain for a few more years to come. So I think that was interesting, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
And then the other thing that Richard also asked, he said, okay, so he said, I'm the publisher of Business Model Generation and all your books, but it still puzzles me. How can you introduce this notion of business model thinking to a much more wider audience, even my mom and grandmother? So that also helped us to say like, yes, maybe we put a book together that is available or applicable or can be applied by many more people, for students, for entrepreneurs, but also in big corporate companies.
Yeah, so if I'm counting correct, this is book 3 already, and you just explained why this book, but why now?
Yeah, I think that what we learned as Business Models Inc. when we gave birth to our company is that we are used to look at business models that emerge in different markets, in different regions. And there's actually a result of the fact that technology is changing super fast. Then you and I as customers are changing. And exactly at that crossroads, we see those business models emerge. And because technology is changing super fast, you see that this notion of bringing all these models together and start to make sense out of that is even hyper relevant today. So I think that is the reason that we believe that we should put this book together right now and help people to make sense out of all these speedy changes, and to figure out for themselves like, here, what is the value that we can bring to our customers next?
Yeah, because this time it was or is COVID-19, but you never know what's going to happen next. So what you're saying is make sure to be prepared for what's coming next. Don't wait for it to happen.
Yeah, you're addressing the right point right now, because this all emerged before the pandemic. But what we saw during the pandemic, that actually this notion of these shifts was a big acceleration of all these shifts. So we really felt that, yeah, we're on the right track. This is the time where we need to publish it. So I'm happy that these books will come from the print right now as we speak.
Yeah. It's just an accelerator. It has been an accelerator for the book, as I think it has been for a lot of projects and businesses. Roland, back to you. What does publishing on a book Sorry, once more. What does publishing a book on this topic mean for your daily business at BMI?
Yeah, this is actually core to how we do business and how we create impact with and for clients. Because what we actually do is in the book, it's filled with case studies, but these case studies, they're not just basic facts that we present, they're stories. And stories work really well. If you write a story and tell a story, then it's easy to show to different audiences, but also different people in teams, the innovators, but also all the other people within a company, to show what new value creation is about. So when we actually are working with our clients to craft future visions and design new business models, we use the power of storytelling. And we've learned throughout the years that if you tell a story about a business model change from a real company, that is really a mind shifter. So then our clients, when they see and hear these stories, they actually are very inspired and say, well, that's actually the shift we need to be making. Let's commit to that right now, and let's commit to business model innovation.
Yeah, so you could say it's part of the DNA of BMI.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. Patrick, you started in 2009 with self-publishing Business Model Generation. Since then, you've published quite some books. Can you tell us a bit about such process?
Yeah, I get this question often where people say like, yeah, I really would like to publish this book, and can you introduce me to your publisher? Well, at that point in time, we self-published, and that's a different ballgame because we wanted to disrupt the publishing industry with a new model. Because on the one hand, we wanted to do crowdfunding, which was not a thing so many years ago yet. Kickstarter was not born in 2010. But we also wanted to make a beautiful management book that is actually used and applied by business people and not like a boring textbook. And that was a different ballgame, because if you look at the business model of publishers, they're not interested to make beautiful books. That sounds a bit weird, but a beautiful book, meaning in terms of design and in terms of a colorful and print, is very, very costly. So on the design part, you can hardly get back the revenue in terms of the investment you make with design, because it's an equivalent of the time that you spend as an author to put the content together. And on the other hand, the printing costs are very high. So what you realize also when you self-publish, that's what we did with Alex back in the days, is you need to put everything together that normally a publisher does. So you need to find the right author, you need to find a designer, you need to find an editor, and also to pay for that. And you need to publish yourself. And once the book is there, you need to also distribute it, which is a total nightmare. So I think before you think about self-publishing, you can do that digitally, but you should not forget that the infrastructure and the experience on applying those channels on PR, etc., that's a game that publishers understand very well.
Yeah, so what you're saying basically is make sure to put together the right team, because teamwork makes the dream work, as we would say at BMI.
Right.
Yeah, and what do you need to do if you want to publish a book?
Yeah, so first of all, like there's so many books and content and stuff out there, so you really need to have a strong opinion or point of view on what you want to achieve and what the story is you want to tell. Because to write a bestseller book, you need to understand what you bring differently in terms of content. And a lot of books we see today are actually repackaged, a kind of repackaging of the same content that we've seen before. And that's not strange, because right now we don't live in this linear world anymore. We don't live in a world of scarcity. It's right now in a world of abundance. So there's so much information out there, and the question is, what's new? So then you need to have a good team that you just mentioned, and I think that really starts with good researchers. And we were super lucky that we met Scott and Oliver, who have been doing a tremendous job for us to really look out, spot those case studies, study them to the kazoo, and then discuss with Roland here, with whom we brought new to our team as our walking business model database. And then we start to identify those different patterns. But if you want to then trust it to paper, you really have to find the right tone of voice. So with Justin, he is a very, very good editor who can just trust this to paper and bring it in the right balance with the designer, who happened to be Martin. And in our last book, Design a Better Business, then we worked together with Eric and Martin, but now Martin took up this job himself. We wanted to make this book in a way that it is kind of produced beforehand in terms of structure. So it's much more clear if you navigate through the book, and it's a repetitive pattern so that you can easily browse to those different shifts as you move through the book. And then in the end, the publisher comes into play, and they really look into editing from a different perspective. So that took a bit of time, and then they make it print ready. And right now, as we speak, the Dutch version is printed in the Baltic States in Europe, and it is about to arrive in the offices shortly, even though I understood from you, Joyce, that this truck with all these books is somewhere missing, right? We don't know where it is. And we just got a copy from Richard in the US that the book just got from the print house itself. So yeah, it's all about the team. And then that was the end of the book production process, but then it really starts. And then we found somebody who's crazy enough to work on the marketing, the PR, and it happens to be Joyce. So now it's your job, right?
Yeah, it is. And as a marketer by heart, I'll do my utmost best to spread this story as far as possible. But also, I know that the product, or in this case, the book, has to be of super high quality to make it fly. And just to get back on the story about the missing books, they are supposed to be in the Netherlands right now. So please all cross your fingers with me that they will be delivered by the end of the day. And then we're talking about the Dutch translation, which is the first translation. So already we have 2 languages in place, because we started off with the English book, which will be soon available, and the Dutch version as well. But enough of that. Let's look into the content right now. Should you be interested in buying the book, though, you can order this at Amazon globally, from the US to the UK to the Japanese website. And also for a Dutch audience, you can order through the well-known channels. If this all puzzles you, just go to businessmodelsinc.com, and there won't be any doubt about it that you will see the book and where to buy it, because it's on our homepage, and it will also be put in the chat. So click that link if you are interested. And right now, back to the content. Roland, the business model shifts. Help me. What is it, and when does a business model shift?
Yeah, okay, so obviously we have a definition in the book. So a business model shift is a move which is deliberate and systematic towards more value and relevance for customers. And you can also put it in another way: the customer wins. And this sounds very obvious and simple, but it's really true, and we see it all the time with our clients. We always move back to this customer to figure out what is needed there to be of value and of relevance.
Yeah, keep the customer in mind, right? With everything you do.
Yeah, and your customer today, but especially your customer tomorrow, and the customer of the future. Yeah.
Patrick, how come you've identified 6 and not 8 or 10 shifts?
Yeah, so we had a couple more, you're right on that. But on the one hand, we saw that when we were nailing them down to the clear patterns we see, then we ended up with 6. And then we also thought, okay, 6 is also almost a magic number, so that's also easier to understand. And we don't want it to overwhelm with all kind of different structures. So the main shifts, we identified 6 of them, and we identified them through fresh watching. And that's a process that people who work with us, they know this this way of looking at business models. But we look at the market, we interpret them, we look at the mechanics of the business model canvas, and then we compare that with what we already know and what we already see, and that's how we make a sense of them and try to spot those different patterns. The shift from products to services is well known, and that's also one of them, and we already identified them in business model generation. And this is a trend or a pattern that we've seen in the past, and it's growing on and on. And when you look, for example, at the exponential shift, that was something that we wanted to put in the book as a really exponential mindset of putting exponential business models together. And that's based on the fact that we, Roland and I, are faculty of Singularity University, and we have been studying those different models. So yes, what we saw is getting to the essence of a specific value creation that was really missing, and also a structure to help people, companies and teams in order to understand, okay, what is this shift about? Why is this shift important? Can we find proof of different stories that actually shows how companies made that shift? And also to spark learnings to make your own shift.
Yeah, let's dive into one of those shifts. Roland, let's look at from products to services. Give me some insights here.
Yeah, so services, actually we all use them. We're subscribed with our phones and to Spotify. So you cannot think about a world without services anymore. But why is it that we flock to these services? It's actually because when you look at a product, it's not about the product itself or its features. They don't matter that much. It's really about how people use them. So Clayton Christensen famously said, people hire products to get a job done. And that means that once you figure out what job people need to get done, you can offer them something as a service. So this thinking about jobs to be done, that's really crucial in the service shift, and that's already well known. So we've seen this shift over and over again. But just to give you an example, think about an airline. So an airline, what is their job to be done? Well, they are of course they are in trouble now, but their job used to be bringing people and goods from A to B in a safe and orderly manner and on time. So they should be able to focus on that. And their job is actually not to repair the engines on their aircraft. That's just a burden and a big distraction for them. So what you see there in this industry is that airlines moved to this service model where they get power by the hour. And the engine manufacturers sell them a service which enable them to make sure that all their engines from their entire fleet are spinning all the time, and they don't have the burden to watch out for problems. They can focus really on what they should be doing, working with passengers. And we have another example as well, and that is the Dollar Shave Club. So the Dollar Shave Club is a great example in the consumer market, in the personal care business. And this actually started from scratch, the shift to a service model in this space. And it started because the whole experience of buying razors, that's just terrible. You have to go to the supermarket, they're locked behind doors, you have to wait in line before you can actually pick one, and then it's hard to pick one, or it's sold out or whatever. So it's a terrible experience. Another thing is that men often forget to replace their blades, and that means that they don't have such a good shave. Actually, what the Dollar Shave Club then offers is everything to make sure you look good and you smell good, because they already expanded this business model in the past few years. And The interesting thing here is that Unilever also saw the emergence of this new business model, and they realized that they themselves didn't have a direct-to-consumer business model. So they actually now own the Dollar Shave Club, and that's quite a smart move, because what we also learned in the research is that a company like Unilever, they don't want to bet their future on only a single business model. So having a portfolio of business models and also a model like Dollar Shave Club, that's very important to them as well.
Yeah, and in a generic way, then in our book, we show those patterns through the lens of the business model canvas. So what I like, Roland, is about the linear way looking at a product. You see in the value proposition that is all about the features and the upgrades. When you look at customers, there's not much of a customer interaction or relationship, and it's all about a one-time sale. And when we then look at the services model, we put it on top of this layer, and then you see a complete different model. So maybe you can explain what is different here.
Yeah, so it's actually in the examples that I just mentioned, what you see in the value proposition, it's actually all about making sure that your customers can focus on what matters to them. So with the Dollar Shave Club, looking good and going out of the door with a smile on your face, and then for the airlines, making sure that they can focus on what they need to be doing. And what you also see is that there is a constant interaction, because you actually now know how customers are using your product and what they're doing with it. And that also gives you the ability to develop it further in a direction that's really a sweet spot for your business and your customers.
Yeah, makes sense. Great examples. On to another shift from physical to digital, for example. I'm wondering, don't all models go digital?
Yeah, I think that's a very good remark. I heard a comparable remark from Michael Anseo, who is head of retail at BNP Paribas in Belgium. And he said, all companies will become digital. So we thought also, is this a shift that we would really like to emphasize and to show how to do it? Because in the end, companies will be all digital. Yes, when we studied those patterns, we realized that there are actually two big different angles there. So we identified four sub shifts, but on the one hand, we see it's about a bolted on shift. That's what we mean with bolted on. The digital model is that it's just a website or a digital element that is advertising your physical product. So the digital embracement is not that big there. But what we see on the other hand is a fully digital model. And when you study those patterns, this fully digital model is something very completely different from a physical model. So for example, knowing your traditional retail supermarket outlet is not comparable to Amazon, who delivers from a different perspective. So that was a big thing that we saw. So what you learn here is it is not about the technology, it's actually about how this technology is actually helping you with your business model to create more value. And that's a really big difference. And there's one case study we want to emphasize. We have in the book on every shift, like a large case study, a medium case study, and small size case studies. And maybe Roland, you can tell me a little bit more about Connectera, because you are the walking business model database.
Yeah, okay, so Connectera, it's focused and targeting farmers and also the industry around it. And what is quite hard is farming is just a tough job to do. If you have a farm with a lot of cows, these cows, they get sick. And usually when they're sick and when you then notice, it's already too late, and a farmer has to spend a lot of money on antibiotics, and the cow cannot produce actually the dollars he needs to have a living, right? Because it doesn't produce any milk. So what Connectera did is they said, okay, let's start a farming revolution where we actually put some IoT on the cows. But just like what Patrick said, It's not about adding IoT devices on cows and then saying to a farmer, here you have a lot of data, you figure it out. Now what they've done is, they've done exactly what Patrick just mentioned. They've applied this technology to get this data from cows, and they now understand their behavior. And we all know that when we are sick, we behave differently. It's the same with cows. So they can track this, and they can already alarm the farmer of small changes in the behavior of the cow, so that they can actually prevent the cow from getting too sick, and that he can take measures right away, and also protect his revenue in the end, and make sure that he has a thriving business.
Yeah, so here we see that this digital element here is, for example, this what we call the relationship is digital, the channel is digital, and it helps them to create a much better value for their value proposition as a whole. So the case study is in the book, also with the visuals and so on. And when you then look at the difference from a more physical business model, where you see a product that is generated through the physical stores and websites into physical sales, then here we see again this pattern where you see it's a continuous relationship what you have with customers. You can also say that for each and every building block, it is digital right now. So it could be a digital value proposition, digital relationship, digital channel, a customer who is digital savvy, and then the revenue stream that is actually a result of that. That means also when you look in a generic way towards the left-hand side is that you need to do different activities. You have to design a digital journey. You have to be able to track clients, make sense of that. And your key resources might shift into being able to understand and redesign algorithms. We often also see in all of those case studies that data providers all of a sudden come into play, and technology partners, because you cannot do everything yourself anymore.
No,
so that's about the digital shift.
Yeah, I think that's one thing that's clear. You can't do it all, and you need to focus on your where you add value for your customers, your value proposition. Yeah. Another shift I'm interested about is the platform shift. You hear a lot about this. What is the essence of this shift?
Yeah, so we identified this pattern in 2010 already with business model generation, and we called that the multi-sided platform, meaning that two or more segments are depending on each other, and if they're not present in an equal way, then the business model on the platform is broken. But as we've seen the rise of very famous business models like Uber, then we felt that we wanted to address this one to also show in our book that we can go beyond these very well-known models. And I think that if you want to look further into platform, I think there's a lot of information. There's a platform out there that helps you to design them. And there's also our friend Sangeet Paul Shaderi, who is really a big guru on those platforms design. But we still wanted to make this more simple and show you actually what it's really about when you design those platforms. Because when we look with our clients, we see that they make a lot of mistakes because they don't get the essence of the platform model right. So then they get stuck into the wrong definitions and the wrong way of working on those different designs. And I think what is interesting that the case study we show that is opposite of a company like Uber is that they started at the same idea or with the same idea, but in the end, they ended somewhere completely different. So when you look at Grab, actually this was founded by a guy who went to, was it Stanford or it was a university, I think it was.
Yeah, I think it was Harvard.
It was Harvard. And then he came back to Asia and he said, I'm going to copy this model and offer these taxi services. But what is interesting is when you look at those platforms, one of the key features that we found that is about ecosystems of platforms. So platforms create platforms and create other platforms. And what is interesting when you look at the difference is that this is not only Uber and Uber Eats, but this is Grab. It's about transport, it's about groceries, it's about courier services, it's about finances. And what is interesting about the philosophy of Grab has nothing to do with Uber, who is monetizing actually and creating big bank accounts for those founders, but it's more about generating value for all these people who can actually do a much better job when you help them with doing a better job for the small, medium enterprises. So by creating these delivery services, this local shop can have access to a much wider market, and then they will actually create a much better wealth for those small communities. So the philosophy is very different, and therefore we wanted to show this model like Grab. And if you look at this pattern that we identified, is again, it's the linear model, but then what we see is when you look at the platform model, it is about matching the consumers and the producer, or the supply and demand, and based on very easy filters, so that you can actually do that, and that triggers more people to come to the platform. So that's all about the platform model, and there are beautiful case studies in the book.
Oh, I'm sure, or for a fact, I know. One final shift I would like to address. It's the circular shift. Roland, can you shed a bit of light on this shift?
Actually, the shift that was not about to be published, if it was about Richard, who decided if he wanted to decide where the circular shift was in the book, yes or no.
Yeah, it was quite interesting. Richard said, well, I'm not sure if it's so relevant in the US. So actually, when we started the book, we first did this chapter. And when he saw it, and when it also was about an American company, he thought, well, yes, I think this is really important. So let me give you that example. And that is actually about Nike. And you see the planet here. And of course, we all know Nike is about sports. It's about performance. But guess what? If you don't have a planet, you can also not do sports, right? So this got Nike thinking. And the interesting thing here is that it got Nike thinking more than 30 years ago already. So that was before the time everybody was talking about the circular economy. They realized at that time in the 90s that they wanted to do something different in terms of social corporate responsibility. That often is a buzzword or used for greenwashing. And back in that time, they already wanted this to be something different for them. They said, well, corporate social responsibility, it should not be some term that we use to say that we're a good company, but it should really drive innovation within our company and beyond. So this got them thinking, and the question they had on their mind was actually, what is waste? And they understood that their shoes that they produced were made of very high quality materials, because if they would make them from low quality materials, the people buying them, the athletes, they cannot perform on a lousy shoe. So they realized, well, we put all this effort in this shoe, very high quality materials, but when they stop using them or when they replace them, they throw the shoe away with all the high quality materials in it. That's such a waste. So what they actually said then, okay, how can we actually reuse those materials and use them again and again and again, because they have so much so high quality. So they started to think about, okay, then we need to get those shoes back to us, right? So what they did is they thought about, how can we make sure that we provide a return channel to our customers so that the shoes come back to us. So what they did is, in many of their stores, not all of them yet, but in many of their stores, there is this return shoe recycle bin where you can put your shoes in, and it doesn't even have to be Nike shoes. So people can return their shoes, and then Nike, they grind them. So that is a different business model from Nike grind, and they grind those shoes into the materials that they're made of, and they use those materials to produce new shoes, but also the surfaces that you see here in the visual. So these shoes are actually made to make the surfaces that you run on. So you actually run on your shoes when you do this in the city parks.
And then when you look at the Nike case study, that it's a large case study. Yeah. So we have 3 different business models that we studied and also explained, right?
Yeah.
And then here again, you see the shift from a linear model towards a circular model. And here, what I like about Martin's visualization is here you throw everything in the trash bin on the right hand side. But when you look at the a circular model, actually you need to make sure that everything stays in the system. But it requires a very different approach. It's not only about these key activities where you use the circular design process, because you need to design for circularity. But it's also about reaching back to those people who are actually conscious, and more, that's what we see. And also that they're able to bring those stuff or those products back. We see different models. So when you dive deeper into that shift, you will see different case studies and also different ways how you can do that.
Thanks for sharing. So now I know all this. So what?
Yeah, so I think what is really important, that was the big aha moment for us, is that you can predict business models. So you can predict your next business model. And why? That's because of the simple reason that as a result of those technology changes, you and I as a consumer are changing. And on those crossroads, we see new business models pop up. So no question that your customers are looking for circular alternatives. So please check out the circular shift. Not for no reason that people get more digital savvy. So your digital shift will happen sooner or later. And you can look at the different case studies out there to figure out what is the best way that I can use and what fits with our company structure or with our company vision. So I think for us, the key moment was that we realized, wow, you can predict this, because there's so much proof out there that these shifts are not a trend. It is real time happening, and you should really consider those in order to understand where you create value next.
Yeah, and we haven't claimed this before, that we can predict business models, but I think it's pretty safe to say, because we have the evidence right now.
Yeah, and I think we are always very modest. Maybe you think the Dutch guys are always very direct. That's true, but we are very modest. But what we see right now, the proof is not only in those different examples. The proof is also in the projects we run, because every time we look into those shifts and we take those shifts as a source of inspiration, we design those business models, and then we study and validate them with those company teams. So it's a big, when we started 2 years ago in New York, right now it's a big way of what we are doing, and what you said in the beginning, it is part of our DNA. So I think it should be part of every company's DNA to understand the shifts and see what's value next and where it is for them.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Is there maybe another big aha moment you would like to share?
Yeah, I think another big aha moment was that we learned that there is not a single business model that companies are betting their money on. So that there are multiple models that they need to run at the same time. As we talked about in the beginning, you can look at the business model as a kind of living organism, and it starts to mature in different markets. And what you see is that you have to understand where it sits in this maturity curve in order to understand, okay, so where is value next? Shouldn't I just work on other business models in order for them to grow, so that I can play the game in the next shift? So an example of one of the clients we work with is that they started to make the shift from the physical into the digital space, but they are managing different models at the same time. So I think, Roland, maybe this portfolio idea about business models, could that be a new topic for our next book?
Yeah,
Oh,
of course.
let me stop you there. Before discussing a next book, let's see what our audience wants to know about this one. It's time for your questions. Over here, Jasper is wondering, do you see businesses having more than one business model, perhaps temporarily, to navigate through the crisis?
And the question is?
If we see if businesses having more than one business model.
Yeah. So that was actually feeding into this notion of this portfolio, and
Yeah.
I think it's a yes. What we see right now in the pandemic is that some companies see that their model is broken, and they can fix that with a temporary model. We also see that some companies, their model are broken. They start with this temporary model, but they now see that's also an alternative because they accelerate the digital shift. So they realize, wow, we can just do much more with our digital presence. Take company, for example, like IKEA, but also take your local restaurant. Maybe this service is also more feasible because I think consumers now accept the fact that these services can be delivered in a digital way. And that's a real big change when you compare that before the pandemic. So yes, they will have multiple models. And I think yes, in the pandemic, it starts with a temporary model, but can also turn into a long-term model.
Yeah, and what we've done in the book as well is we introduced for the large case studies a periodic table of business model elements. And actually, what the question is here and what is valid all the time is, even if you cannot now reach your customers or your product, there's no demand for it, you still have a lot of assets on the left-hand side of your model and you still have those customers. So it's about reconfiguring those elements and come up with a new model. And that can indeed be temporary or your next new model.
Yeah, clear. Thanks for answering this one on behalf of Jasper, I think. Another question. Because the example given during these presentations are focused on medium and large companies, but how can new small businesses going into market benefit from the book?
Yeah, so I think we actually have two types of shifts in the book. So there's a good mix of the bigger companies that make a shift from where they are with their current business model and then they evolve. But of course, every big company, it started very small. So that's what you see in the large case studies. We have a timeline there, and we start actually also for the Unilever large case when they were still very small. And the same logic applies there. Understand your customer and figure out what is really the essence where you really should focus on. And I think starting a company, and Patrick as an entrepreneur knows better than me, but it's always about focus. And if you do that in a big corporate and start up a new company or a new venture, that is about focus. But for a small company, it's also about focus and really understanding where is the value.
Yeah, and then during the pandemic, I was teaching for different retail companies, like small, medium companies. And then what we said is that once is, okay, look at the services shift. So if it's not about your product, what about the services? It was interesting. So there was this pet shop, and they said, wow, actually the job to be done is not the owners. It's about those animals and that they behave and that they feel well. And then they saw that throughout the Netherlands, they had all different small shops, and the one shop that was paying the attention to the animal and its well-being, that had the most revenue. And the other thing what we saw is also this digital shift that we said, like, hey, for your company, we saw that some small retail shops already have a little bit of a digital model. They experienced a steep growth. So I think that, this notion of big and small company, it's really right that every company started small. And if you are a big company and you start to make the shift, again, you need to start small.
Yeah, makes sense. Maybe you could name a few of the smaller cases mentioned in the book.
Yeah, we have like a very typical one. That's a Dutch model. It's called Bike as a Service. I think that one is truly interesting because it shows that even a simple product like a bike can turn into a service. What other small case studies we have? Yeah,
Connectera that we just mentioned. And I think it's more most of the case studies that are in there that might be big now, we actually describe how they started. So I think there are lots of valuable lessons in there.
Another one from the Dutch market is Tony Chocolonely.
Yeah.
That's actually a brand that introduced a different way of looking into chocolate and production. It was interesting because people believed that they could never charge a premium price, and now they did, and they're super successful. They've been growing like crazy.
Yeah.
And I think others like Run the Runway we have.
Yeah. And it's also how you define big and small.
Yeah. I should say they should see for themselves, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. I think one final question. Anton is wondering what's the impact of this book on our own business model?
And whose own business model?
Of BMI.
All right. I think, Roland, what do you think?
Well, I think what we do all the time, and that's a lesson that I learn over and over again. Actually, what we do, we make explicit what is implicit. So with this book, like Patrick already mentioned, we can do that even better and help our clients clearly see what the path is for them to predict, okay, we can move in this way. And actually make sure that they are able to commit to it because they really see where they're going. So for me, it's strategy is a visual art and it's collaborative. So this helps us move everybody into these new directions.
Yeah, and I think I believe that when we started in 2010, we were about educating people on applying those new tools, also co-create with post-it notes, etc. But when we started to dive deeper into this content, then we realized that this content is crucial. And right now we apply this content, and therefore we have different customers. We play a different ball game into different markets. So I think that is a big game changer. And the other thing is, in terms of the business model, we are also now developing this whole database with those business models so that you can also search very fast into these different models. So I think on the one hand, it's about the content that makes us much better and more relevant for customers, and therefore being involved in different projects. And on the other hand, also a little bit of to monetize that through applying the database and made it available for customers.
Yeah, clear. It's time to wrap up. So please put your question in the chat if you have more questions. We will try to answer most of them after ending the session. So stay tuned.
Unfortunately, we don't have a book, right? We should have had the book here, but we don't.
Wait for it. A launch wouldn't be complete without showing the book.
No way.
Roll.
It's a fake news, right?
Here it is. I sent it to you by Nikki, one of the members of the core team. And it's
do the honors too.
Great, Nikki.
No, I put it in the. Okay. Wow.
There it is.
It's for you.
It's for you. I think it's the sole copy out there at the moment. So I'm quite proud to have it in my hands. But I am going to hand it over to you two to actually also take a look at your own blood, sweat and tears come to life in this wonderful book.
Oh, wow.
And I think this also allows for some
Yeah, so I think one important remark to make is that this cover is different from the English version. You're going to experience a very different one for the English book. And then it's simply beautiful. So if you look at the inside, that's the same. I really love the way it smells and the way it looks. So super cool. Here you go.
Me too, thanks.
The confetti cover doesn't work.
So I'll just give you a couple of more minutes, Nick.
Patrick, Roland, thanks so much for presenting this BMI Inspires. And to our audience, if you think this is an interesting webinar, you can also check our other topic in this series. Next month, we have another episode. And of course, if you want to order the book, please go to Amazon.com and type business model shifts, and you can order as many copies as you wish. Thanks for watching. See you next time.